Hey, you're here. That's good. Let me tell you about a day, or better, a time, when Rome was not yet an empire, nor a superpower. Just a city surrounded by uncertainty, enemies, and ambitions larger than its own walls. Before the emperors, before the legions crossed 3 continents, there was a village hardened by the need to resist. There, what the world would one day call Rome was born. Imagine a collection of humble huts perched atop 7 rugged hills overlooking a narrow, winding river called the Tiber. This wasn't a grand city with marble temples, but a strategic crossroads. To the north lay the sophisticated, yet often aggressive, Etruscans, with their advanced metalwork and complex religious rites. To the south, the Latins, distant cousins, but fiercely independent city-states, often rivals. And all around, the rough terrain teemed with Sabine and Volscian tribes, known for their raids and their unyielding resistance to any encroaching power. In this crucible of danger and opportunity, a legend took root. Twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, abandoned to the wild, suckled by a she-wolf, and later raised by a shepherd, were said to have founded this nascent settlement. Their story, steeped in violence and destiny, with Romulus ultimately slaying Remus over a boundary dispute, foreshadowed the brutal, often bloody path Rome would forward for centuries to come. It was a birth marked by blood and an iron will, setting the tone for what was to follow. For centuries, this small village transformed into a city ruled by kings, some native, some Etruscan. These early monarchs, often depicted as strong military leaders, laid the groundwork for Rome's future might. They built walls, organized the first rudimentary armies, and slowly expanded Rome's influence over the surrounding plains. It was a slow, grinding process of constant skirmishes and uneasy truces, where every inch of arable land, every stream, every strategic hilltop had to be fought for and defended. The early Romans learned quickly that survival in this harsh environment depended not on treaties alone, but on discipline, tenacity, and an unshakable belief in their collective destiny. The concept of virtus, a blend of courage, duty, and masculine excellence, became deeply ingrained in their psyche, a fundamental building block of their society and military. Every citizen was, by necessity, a soldier prepared to defend his family, his land, and his nascent city with his life. Then came a pivotal moment, around 509 BCE. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, was expelled. Whether through a popular uprising against tyranny or a more complex political maneuver by the aristocratic families, the outcome was clear. Rome would no longer be ruled by monarchs. The Republic was born. This new system of government, while ostensibly designed to prevent absolute power, created its own unique set of internal and external pressures. Power was now shared, albeit unequally, between elected magistrates and the formidable Senate. This internal struggle between the patricians, the old aristocratic families, and the plebeians, the common citizens, would shape Roman politics for centuries, often influencing military decisions and the distribution of conquered lands. But outside the city, the challenges remained relentlessly external. The fledgling republic found itself immediately embroiled in a series of conflicts with its near neighbors. The Latin League, a confederation of allied city-states, viewed Rome's growing power with suspicion and alarm. The Volscians and Equi, fierce hill tribes, saw Roman expansion as a direct threat to their traditional raiding grounds. Each war, each battle, no matter how small, was a test of the Republic's resolve. The early Roman army, a citizen militia, was forged in this furnace of constant warfare. Farmers by trade, they would drop their tools, pick up their spears, and march to defend their homes, their fields, and their nascent republic. Casualties were high, and defeat was always a terrifying possibility. The very survival of Rome hung by a thread multiple times. It was during these brutal, localized conflicts that the Roman military machine began to develop its defining characteristics: an unparalleled ability to recover from defeat, an ingenious adaptability on the battlefield, and a grim determination to fight until ultimate victory, no matter the cost. This wasn't about glory yet. It was about simply enduring. One of the defining early struggles was with the city of Veii, a powerful Etruscan rival just a few miles north of the Tiber. Veii was wealthy, well fortified, and a constant thorn in Rome's side, controlling crucial trade routes and fertile land. The conflict between Rome and Veii was protracted, lasting for decades with numerous skirmishes and campaigns. It culminated in a legendary 10-year siege, a brutal test of endurance for both sides. Unlike earlier, shorter wars, this was a commitment demanding resources, sustained effort, and a level of military organization previously unseen. The story goes that the Roman general Camillus ultimately captured Veii by digging a tunnel beneath its walls, a testament to Roman ingenuity and relentless determination. The fall of Veii around 396 BCE was a watershed moment. It eliminated a major rival, secured Rome's northern frontier, and provided a vast amount of new land and resources. More importantly, it showed that Rome was capable of sustained military effort and decisive victory against formidable opponents. It was the first true step beyond mere survival, hinting at the vast expansion that would one day define the Roman story. This wasn't an empire yet, but the seeds were sown in the blood and sweat of these early struggles. Each victory, hard-won, ingrained a lesson: that conquest brought security, resources, and, perhaps most importantly, a reputation. The fear of Roman power began to spread, slowly, hesitantly, among its neighbors. The Roman way of war, born of necessity, was simple: relentless pressure, superior organization, and an unwavering will to win. They might lose battles, but they would never lose the war. This grim determination, forged in the crucible of defending their very existence, would become the hallmark of the legions that would one day conquer the known world. From this small, embattled city on the Tiber, an unstoppable force was beginning to stir, driven by a legacy of resilience and a vision, however nascent, of undisputed dominance. With Veii defeated, Rome's gaze, once fixed on mere survival, began to drift beyond its immediate hills, across the fertile plains and rugged mountains of central Italy. But this expansion was not a straightforward march. It was a brutal, generations-long struggle against formidable, often cunning, opponents. The most defining of these early conflicts were the Samnite Wars, a series of 3 epic confrontations against the Samnites, a fierce, warlike people inhabiting the mountainous regions to Rome's southeast. These were not quick skirmishes, but protracted, costly struggles that would fundamentally shape the Roman army and their approach to conquest. The First Samnite War, 343 to 341 BCE, began not from Roman aggression, but as a response to an appeal for help from the city of Capua, a wealthy, Greek-influenced city in Campania, which was being threatened by Samnite raids. Rome, ever opportunistic and eager to extend its influence, stepped in. This short war ended inconclusively, but it showed Rome the mettle of their new adversaries. The Samnites were master mountaineers, tough and adaptable, fighting in a looser, more flexible formation than the Roman phalanx-like system. This encounter planted the seed of adaptation in the Roman military mind, forcing them to consider new ways of fighting in varied terrains. The real crucible came with the Second Samnite War, 326 to 304 BC, a truly epic struggle that spanned over 2 decades. This was a direct contest for supremacy in central Italy. The Samnites, seeing Rome's growing power as an existential threat, allied with other Italian tribes to contain the burgeoning republic. One of the most humiliating moments for Rome came at the Battle of the Caudine Forks in 321 BCE. The Roman army, lured into a narrow defile, was trapped by the Samnites. With no hope of escape, the entire army was forced to surrender. Instead of slaughtering them, the Samnites, with a grim sense of triumph, forced the Romans to pass under the yoke. A public humiliation where they walked beneath a symbolic yoke of spears, stripped of their arms, a testament to their defeat. This was a profound insult, a stain on Roman honor that fueled their resolve for revenge and ultimately total victory. This defeat, rather than breaking Rome, hardened its resolve. It forced a radical transformation of the Roman army. The rigid, Greek-inspired phalanx, effective on open ground, proved unwieldy in the mountainous terrain where the Samnites excelled. Rome learned from its enemies, adapting and evolving. This era saw the full development of the manipular legion, a highly flexible, checkerboard formation where smaller, independent units, maniples, could maneuver and support each other, making the army far more versatile. Each maniple could operate semi-independently, allowing the Romans to absorb enemy charges, open gaps to envelop flanks, and fight effectively on varied terrain. This innovation, born from bitter defeat, was a stroke of military genius. It transformed Rome from a powerful city-state into an unstoppable military machine, capable of fighting in almost any environment. The Roman legionary, armed with the scutum, large shield, pilum, heavy javelin, and gladius, short sword, became the most effective infantryman of his age. The Third Samnite War, 298 to 290 BCE, was Rome's final push for dominance. The Samnites, desperate, once again forged a grand coalition, this time including Gauls, Etruscans, and Umbrians, a formidable alliance that sought to crush Rome once and for all. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Synonym in 295 BCE, a massive engagement where Roman discipline and the flexibility of their new legions proved superior. Despite initial setbacks and heavy losses, including a consul's death, Rome held firm and eventually shattered the coalition. The Samnites were finally subdued, their long and valiant resistance broken. This victory solidified Rome's control over central Italy, transforming the Republic from a regional power into the undisputed master of the Italian peninsula. But Rome's expansion wasn't over. Its growing dominance inevitably brought it into conflict with the sophisticated Greek city-states in southern Italy, known collectively as Magna Graecia. These cities, rich and culturally advanced, feared Roman encroachment. Tarentum, a powerful Greek city, appealed for help from Pyrrhus of Epirus, a brilliant Hellenistic general and a distant relative of Alexander the Great. Pyrrhus arrived in Italy in 280 BCE with a formidable army, including war elephants, a terrifying sight to the Romans, who had never encountered such beasts in battle. Pyrrhus initially achieved stunning victories at Heraclea, 280 BCE, and Asculum, 279 BC. At Heraclea, his elephants broke Roman lines, causing panic. At Asculum, despite suffering heavy losses himself, he again forced the Romans to retreat. However, these victories came at a terrible cost. After Asculum, Pyrrhus famously remarked, "One more such victory, and I am undone." This gave rise to the term Pyrrhic victory, signifying a triumph won at such a devastating cost that it amounts to a defeat. The Romans, despite losing, refused to surrender. Their ability to quickly raise new armies, even after crushing defeats, baffled Pyrrhus. He realized he was fighting not just an army, but an entire people whose determination was boundless. Exhausted by the continuous, costly fighting, Pyrrhus eventually withdrew from Italy in 275 BCE after the Battle of Beneventum, which, while not a decisive Roman victory, was a costly stalemate for Pyrrhus. His departure left the Greek cities vulnerable, and Rome soon absorbed them. By 272 BCE, Rome was the undisputed master of the entire Italian peninsula, from the Alps to the toe of the boot. The groundwork for a far greater empire was complete, and its legions, forged in the fires of Italian soil, were ready for the world. Having forged the unstoppable might of the legions on the battlefields of Italy, Rome now stood as the undisputed master of the peninsula. But mastery on land was one thing. Across the narrow straits of Sicily lay a new, colossal challenge, a maritime empire of unprecedented wealth and power. This was Carthage, the jewel of Phoenicia in North Africa, a city of merchants and sailors whose vast trading network stretched across the Mediterranean, dominating the seas with its formidable navy. Carthage was, to Rome, a whale to their eagle, supreme in its own element, but a creature of an entirely different kind. The stage was set for a clash that would determine the very destiny of the Western Mediterranean. These were the Punic Wars, a series of 3 brutal conflicts that would push both powers to their absolute limits. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, erupted over a seemingly minor dispute on the island of Sicily. Messina, a strategic city on the island's eastern tip, found itself caught between the ambitions of Rome and Carthage. When a group of Campanian mercenaries, known as the Mamertines, appealed to both powers for aid, Rome saw an opportunity, not merely for land, but for prestige, for control of the grain-rich island, and perhaps for a test of their newfound might against a truly global rival. Carthage, viewing Sicily as its backyard, could not tolerate Roman interference. A proxy war quickly escalated into a full-blown confrontation between the two burgeoning superpowers. There was just one, rather significant, problem for Rome. They were not a naval power. Their legions were peerless on land, but they possessed virtually no warships capable of challenging Carthage's massive fleet of quinquiremes, mighty warships designed for ramming and boarding. Carthage had centuries of seafaring tradition, skilled shipbuilders, and veteran sailors. Rome had farms, yet the Romans, with their characteristic grim determination, refused to be deterred. Legend says they found a stranded Carthaginian quinquireme and, with astonishing speed and ingenuity, reverse-engineered it, building over 100 new ships in a matter of months. This was an astonishing feat, a testament to Roman organizational power and their ability to adapt on the fly. It also hints at a curious detail. How did a landlocked power suddenly become a naval force? By sheer force of will, and likely by utilizing skilled shipbuilders from their newly acquired Greek cities in southern Italy. But merely building ships wasn't enough. They also needed to figure out how to fight at sea. Roman legions were trained for hand-to-hand combat, for grappling with enemies on solid ground. Naval warfare of the time relied on skilled maneuvering, ramming, and intricate boarding actions. To compensate for their lack of naval experience, the Romans invented a revolutionary device, the corvus or raven. This was a heavy gangplank, fitted with a large spiked hook at its end. When a Roman ship approached an enemy vessel, the corvus would pivot and swing down, its spike impaling the deck of the Carthaginian ship, locking the two vessels together. Suddenly, a naval battle transformed into a land battle on water, turning the Carthaginian advantage in seamanship into a Roman advantage in infantry combat. It was a brilliant, if somewhat clunky, innovation. The early years of the war were brutal. Rome suffered massive losses at sea, not just from Carthaginian fleets, but from devastating storms. The Corvus itself, while effective, made Roman ships top-heavy and vulnerable to rough seas, often capsizing them. But Rome persisted. They rebuilt their fleets again and again, their economic and manpower reserves seemingly endless. Major naval victories at Mylae, 260 BCE, and Ecnomus, 256 BC, the latter being one of the largest naval battles in antiquity, demonstrated Rome's growing proficiency. Mylae was particularly significant as it was Rome's first major naval victory against Carthage, largely due to the Corvus. The Romans captured the Carthaginian admiral's ship and celebrated wildly, dedicating the prows of captured Carthaginian ships as trophies in the Roman Forum. The war dragged on for 23 years, a testament to the immense resources and stubborn determination of both sides. Finally, in 241 BCE, after another massive Roman effort to build yet another fleet, the decisive Battle of the Aegates Islands took place. This time, the Roman fleet, lighter and perhaps having abandoned the cumbersome Corvus for greater maneuverability, decisively defeated the Carthaginian navy. Carthage, exhausted, its treasury depleted, and its naval supremacy broken, had no choice but to sue for peace. The terms of peace were harsh. Carthage ceded Sicily to Rome, making it Rome's first overseas province. They also had to pay a massive war indemnity, a crushing sum that further crippled their economy. This victory marked a monumental turning point for Rome. They were no longer just a land power. They were now a burgeoning naval power, masters of the seas around Italy, and with their first overseas territory, the very first seeds of a vast empire beyond Italy were planted. But the rivalry was far from over. Carthage, deeply wounded, would not forget this humiliation. The stage was set for the return of a figure who would shake Rome to its very core. The peace after the First Punic War felt less like a resolution and more like a tense pause, a mere breath before a greater storm. Carthage, though defeated, simmered with resentment, particularly the powerful Barcid family. Hamilcar Barca, a brilliant Carthaginian general from the First War, famously made his 9-year-old son, Hannibal, swear an oath of undying hatred against Rome. This wasn't just a father's fierce vow. It was a prophecy. That young boy, Hannibal Barca, would grow to become one of history's most audacious and terrifying military geniuses and the bane of Rome's existence. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE, ignited not in Sicily, but in Hispania, modern-day Spain, where Carthage was aggressively expanding its territories to compensate for its losses. Hannibal, now a seasoned commander, besieged Saguntum, a city allied with Rome. This was a deliberate provocation, a direct challenge to Rome's growing influence. Rome, bound by treaty, demanded Hannibal's surrender. Carthage refused, and the war was on. What followed was a campaign of such audacity and brilliance that it still astonishes military strategists today. Hannibal's plan was nothing short of suicidal to most. Instead of fighting Rome on the seas or in Spain, he would bring the war directly to the heart of Roman Italy. In 218 BCE, he embarked on one of the most incredible military feats in history, crossing the Alps with his entire army, including dozens of war elephants. This wasn't merely a march. It was an epic struggle against nature itself. Thousands of men and many elephants perished from cold, treacherous mountain passes, and ambushes by hostile tribes. The sheer willpower required for such an undertaking is almost unfathomable. This unexpected entry into Italy stunned Rome, which had prepared for a war in Spain or Sicily, not on its doorstep. The appearance of massive elephants a terrifying spectacle in the snow-capped mountains, only added to the psychological shock. Once in Italy, Hannibal unleashed a series of devastating blows upon the Roman Republic. At the Battle of Trebia, 218 BCE, he lured the Romans across a freezing river, then sprang an ambush with hidden cavalry, annihilating much of their army. Next came Lake Trasimene, 217 BC, where he cleverly ambushed a Roman army marching along a misty lakeside, trapping them against the water and massacring them. Rome had lost two major armies in quick succession, and panic began to grip the city. These defeats highlighted Hannibal's tactical brilliance and Rome's often predictable, aggressive approach. But the true nightmare unfolded in 216 BCE at the Battle of Cannae. This was Rome's darkest hour, arguably the most devastating defeat in their entire history. An enormous Roman army, perhaps 80,000 strong, twice the size of Hannibal's forces, confronted the Carthaginian army on the open plains of Apulia. The Romans expected a straightforward frontal assault. Instead, Hannibal executed a tactical masterpiece, a double envelopment. He intentionally allowed his weaker center to give ground, forming a crescent shape, drawing the Roman legions deeper into a trap. Then, his veteran African infantry on the flanks swung inwards, while his cavalry, having routed the Roman horse, circled around to attack the Roman rear. The Roman army was completely surrounded, packed tightly together, unable to maneuver or fight effectively. The slaughter was unimaginable. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers, including a consul, 80 senators, and numerous other nobles, were butchered in a single day. Some estimates claim up to 70,000 Roman deaths, a loss rate that few ancient armies ever recovered from. The battlefield was said to be littered with bodies and so many discarded rings from fallen Roman knights that Hannibal sent a bushel of them back to Carthage as proof of his victory. The sheer scale of the defeat plunged Rome into despair. Many of its allies defected, and it seemed the Republic might collapse. It was a test of survival unlike any they had faced. Yet, Rome did not break. Instead of surrendering, they chose to endure. They adopted a new strategy proposed by Quintus Fabius Maximus, dubbed Cunctator, the delayer. Fabius avoided direct pitched battles, instead employing guerrilla tactics, harassing Hannibal's foraging parties and cutting off his supplies. This strategy, though unpopular with the Roman populace initially, slowly began to wear down Hannibal's army, which was isolated in Italy without strong reinforcements from Carthage. Fabius's cautious approach, a stark contrast to Rome's usual aggressive style, proved to be exactly what was needed after the catastrophe of Cannae. It was a testament to Roman adaptability, even in the face of utter devastation. Even in its darkest hour, Rome possessed a remarkable ability to find unlikely heroes and adapt to the most dire circumstances. After the catastrophe of Cannae, the Republic seemed on the brink. Yet, amidst the despair, a new strategic vision began to emerge, championed by a young, brilliant general named Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus. He understood that fighting Hannibal on Italian soil, where the Carthaginian general held the tactical advantage, was a losing game. The solution? Take the war to Africa, to Carthage itself. Scipio, barely in his 20s, was given command of the Roman forces in Hispania, a region still largely under Carthaginian control. This was a bold move, defying conventional wisdom that dictated focusing solely on Hannibal in Italy. But Scipio proved his genius by systematically conquering Carthaginian strongholds in Spain, culminating in the stunning capture of Cartagena, then Carthago Nova in 209 BCE, a vital supply base. He then decisively defeated Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal Barca, at the Battle of the Metaurus River in Italy, 207 BCE, preventing Hasdrubal's army from linking up with Hannibal's forces. Hasdrubal's severed head was thrown into Hannibal's camp, a grim message that the tide had truly turned. With Spain secured and Hannibal's reinforcements cut off, Scipio, against the cautious advice of many in the Roman Senate, convinced Rome to allow him to invade North Africa. His logic was irrefutable. Hannibal would be forced to abandon Italy to defend his homeland. It was a massive gamble, a desperate but brilliant strategic stroke. In 204 BCE, Scipio landed in Africa, quickly gaining allies among the Numidian tribes, particularly King Massinissa, whose cavalry would prove crucial. The invasion of Africa forced Carthage's hand. They recalled Hannibal from Italy, ending his 15-year-long, devastating campaign on Roman soil. It must have been a bitter moment for the great general, leaving Italy after so many triumphs, without having truly broken Rome. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown, a clash of titans between two of history's greatest military minds, Hannibal Barca and Publius Cornelius Scipio. The decisive engagement was the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, fought near Carthage. Hannibal had returned to Africa, gathering a new army, including his war elephants, which he deployed at the front of his lines. Scipio, having studied Hannibal's tactics, prepared for the elephants by aligning his legions in columns, rather than a solid line, creating narrow lanes. When the elephants charged, many ran harmlessly down these lanes, where they were either killed or turned back by javelins. This brilliant counter-tactic negated Hannibal's terrifying weapon. The battle itself was a fierce struggle, but Scipio's well-drilled legions, combined with the superior Numidian cavalry led by Massinissa, proved decisive. Scipio's cavalry, unlike at Cannae, routed Hannibal's cavalry, then circled back to attack the Carthaginian infantry from the rear. Hannibal's veteran mercenaries and citizen levies, though fighting bravely, were overwhelmed. It was the only time Hannibal was decisively beaten in a pitched battle. The defeat at Zama was catastrophic for Carthage. With their army shattered and their general defeated, they had no choice but to sue for peace. The terms were brutal. Carthage lost all its overseas territories, including Spain, which became a vast Roman province. They had to pay an even larger indemnity than before, were forbidden from raising an army without Roman permission, and their powerful navy was almost entirely disbanded. Carthage was reduced to a mere client state, stripped of its power and independence. Yet, even this crushing defeat wasn't enough for some Romans. Cato the Elder, a prominent senator, famously ended every speech, regardless of topic, with the chilling phrase, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. He feared Carthage's potential for recovery and saw it as a perpetual threat. This relentless Roman determination eventually led to the Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC, a short, brutal conflict driven by Roman paranoia and Carthaginian defiance against Roman demands. It was less a war of grand battles and more siege. After a 3-year siege, Roman forces under Scipio Aemilianus, grandson by adoption of Scipio Africanus, finally breached Carthage's walls. The city was systematically razed to the ground, its buildings torn down, and its inhabitants enslaved or massacred. The land was reportedly sown with salt, a symbolic act to prevent anything from ever growing there again, though this detail is debated by historians. Carthage, Rome's ancient rival, was utterly annihilated, removed from the map. The Western Mediterranean was now, unequivocally, Roman. The stage was now set for Rome to look east. With Carthage utterly destroyed, Rome stood as the undisputed hegemon of the Western Mediterranean. Yet across the Adriatic Sea, In the lands of ancient Greece and the sprawling empires of the Hellenistic East lay a world of immense wealth, ancient culture, and sophisticated military powers. These were the successors to Alexander the Great's vast empire, ruled by powerful dynasties like the Antigonids in Macedon, the Seleucids in Syria, and the Ptolemies in Egypt. These Hellenistic kingdoms, with their massive phalanxes and elaborate court intrigues, initially viewed Rome as little more than an uncouth, if tenacious, barbarian power. They were about to learn a very painful lesson. The first major confrontation in the East was the Macedonian Wars, specifically the Second Macedonian War, 200 to 197 BCE. It began not from a direct Roman desire for conquest, but from a curious blend of Roman opportunism and appeals from Greek city-states, fearing the expansionist ambitions of Philip V of Macedon. Philip had allied with Hannibal during the Second Punic War. A slight Rome had not forgotten, and was now aggressively expanding his influence in Greece and the Aegean. Rome, having just emerged victorious over Carthage, was reluctant to embark on another major war. However, the appeals from Athens and Rhodes, coupled with strategic concerns about Macedonian power, convinced the Senate to act. This war was framed by Rome as a liberation, to free the Greeks from Macedonian tyranny, a clever piece of propaganda that won them initial support. The decisive clash came at the Battle of Cynocephaly in 197 BCE. Here, the rigid, massive Macedonian phalanx, a formation of tightly packed spearmen, faced the flexible Roman manipular legion. For centuries, the phalanx had been considered invincible, a bristling wall of sarissas, long spears, that could crush any frontal assault. But the undulating terrain of Cynocephaly proved to be its undoing. The Macedonian phalanx, operating on uneven ground, found its cohesion breaking. Gaps appeared in its lines, and its unwieldy length made it difficult to maneuver quickly. The Roman legions, with their adaptable maniples, exploited these weaknesses with devastating effect. A Roman tribune, noticing a gap, led 20 maniples around the Macedonian flank and attacked their exposed rear. It was a tactical revelation. Roman flexibility had finally bested the formidable phalanx. Philip V was decisively defeated, and Macedon's power was severely curtailed. Rome declared the Greek city-states free, a declaration that masked their true intent of establishing Roman influence. But the Hellenistic world had more titans to offer. Next came Antiochus III, the Seleucid king, who ruled a vast empire stretching from Anatolia to India. Antiochus, often called the Great, harbored ambitions of restoring the glory of Alexander's empire and saw Rome's growing influence in Greece as a direct challenge. He offered asylum to Hannibal, Rome's most hated enemy, and began to interfere in Greek affairs. This sparked the Roman-Syrian War, 192 to 188 BCE. The Romans dispatched a seasoned army, led by none other than Scipio Africanus, the victor of Zama, and his brother Lucius Scipio. The decisive battle was at Magnesia in 190 BCE in Asia Minor. Antiochus commanded a truly enormous army, said to number over 70,000 men, including war elephants, side chariots, and a fearsome phalanx. Scipio, despite being heavily outnumbered, utilized his tactical genius once more. The battle began with the terrifying charge of Antiochus's side chariots, designed to cut through enemy lines. However, the Romans were prepared. Their skirmishers, combined with swift cavalry actions, managed to turn the chariots against their own lines, causing chaos. The battle then devolved into a fierce struggle, but the flexibility and discipline of the Roman legions, alongside the decisive actions of their cavalry, slowly gained the upper hand. The Seleucid phalanx, though formidable, once again proved vulnerable to flanking maneuvers and sustained pressure. The war elephants, despite their initial terror-inducing effect, became a liability when panicked, trampling their own troops. Antiochus's army was utterly routed, suffering enormous casualties. This victory was monumental. It broke the power of the Seleucid Empire and confirmed Rome's military supremacy over the most sophisticated armies of the East. The consequences were immense. Antiochus was forced to sign the humiliating Treaty of Apamea, stripping him of almost all his territories in Asia Minor and imposing a colossal war indemnity. Rome acquired vast new territories and riches, though they continued their policy of liberating Greek states, effectively making them Roman dependencies. This period also saw the Third Macedonian War, 171 to 168 BCE, which ended at the Battle of Pydna, completely crushing Macedonian independence. The city of Corinth was famously razed in 146 BCE as a warning to other Greek cities not to defy Rome, a chilling echo of Carthage's fate, proving that Roman liberation had a very hard edge. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Rome was no longer just a Mediterranean power. It was a global superpower. Its legions had triumphed over mountain tribes, Carthaginian genius, and Hellenistic military might. Its territory stretched from Spain to Greece, and its influence was felt from the Atlantic to Asia Minor. The Republic was at the zenith of its external power. But this rapid expansion, while bringing unprecedented wealth and glory, also sowed the seeds of unprecedented internal strife, setting the stage for a new kind of conflict: civil war. The vast empire Rome had built, stretching from Hispania to Asia Minor, brought unimaginable wealth and power. But this very success contained the seeds of its own destruction. The late Roman Republic, from the mid-2nd century BCE onwards, was a period of increasing internal turmoil, political assassinations, and devastating civil wars. The traditional citizen-soldier army, once the bedrock of Roman power, was crumbling under the weight of prolonged campaigns and changing social structures. Farmers, serving for years far from their lands, returned to find their farms neglected or bought up by wealthy aristocrats using cheap slave labor from conquered territories. This created a landless, impoverished urban proletariat, ripe for political manipulation. The spark that ignited this era of internal conflict came with the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. Both tribunes of the plebs, they attempted radical land reforms to redistribute public land to the poor. Their intentions were noble: to restore the traditional backbone of the Republic by creating more citizen farmers capable of serving in the army. However, their methods were revolutionary, bypassing the Senate and appealing directly to the popular assemblies. This challenged the established order and led to their violent deaths. Tiberius was murdered by a mob of senators in 133 BCE, and Gaius, a decade later, was cornered and killed in 121 BCE. Their deaths set a terrifying precedent. Political disagreements were now settled not by debate, but by bloodshed on the streets of Rome, often orchestrated by powerful factions. Amidst this growing social unrest and political violence, an external threat emerged that forced Rome to face its military shortcomings and inadvertently paved the way for a revolutionary change. For nearly a decade, starting around 113 BCE, vast Germanic tribes, the Cimbri and Teutons, swept down from the north, migrating through Gaul and threatening Italy. These were formidable warriors, fierce and numerous, and they inflicted a series of humiliating defeats on Roman armies, culminating in the Battle of Orazio in 105 BCE. Here, two separate Roman consular armies, numbering perhaps 80,000 men, were annihilated by the Cimbri and Teutons, a disaster even worse than Cannae in terms of military losses. The sheer scale of the defeat sent a shiver of terror through Rome. It became clear that the traditional levy system, which relied on property-owning citizens, was no longer adequate to defend a republic. Enter Gaius Marius, a new man, meaning not from the old nobility, who rose through the ranks due to sheer military talent. Elected consul an unprecedented 7 times, Marius recognized the urgent need for military reform. His solution, implemented around 107 BCE, was revolutionary. He opened recruitment to the Cappaitensi, the head count, the landless poor. These men, with nothing to lose and everything to gain, flocked to his banners, eager for pay, plunder, and a share of land upon discharge. Marius provided them with standardized equipment and intensive training. More importantly, he fostered a professional army, loyal not to the Republic as an abstract concept, but to their general, who promised them their livelihood and their future. This was a critical shift as it detached the army from the state and bound it to individual commanders, a dangerous precedent for the Republic. Marius's reforms proved highly effective against the Germanic invaders. At the Battle of Aquae Sextii, 102 BC, Marius decisively crushed the Teutons. The next year, at the Battle of Vercelli, 101 BC, he, alongside his co-commander Catulus, annihilated the Cimbri. Rome was saved, and Marius was hailed as the 3rd founder of Rome. His professional legions, marching in standardized formation, equipped uniformly, and bound by oaths to their general, were a formidable fighting force, a stark contrast to the less reliable citizen militias of old. However, the consequences of Marius's reforms extended far beyond the Germanic threat. The loyalty of soldiers to their generals, rather than to the Senate or the Republic, became a potent weapon in the increasingly brutal political struggles within Rome. The Social War, 91 to 87 BCE, a massive and bloody conflict between Rome and its Italian allies, who demanded full Roman citizenship, further cemented this shift. The allies, who had fought and died for Rome for centuries, felt cheated. Their uprising forced Rome to eventually grant citizenship to all Italians, but the cost was immense, with hundreds of thousands dead. This war also gave rise to new military leaders, including Marius's former quaestor, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla was a staunch conservative, a champion of the senatorial elite, and a man of ruthless ambition. When command of a lucrative war against Mithridates VI of Pontus, a powerful king in Asia Minor, was controversially transferred from Sulla to Marius by popular assembly, Sulla did the unthinkable. He marched his legions on Rome in 88 BC. This was an unprecedented act, a direct assault on the very heart of the Republic by a Roman general. Marius fled, but later, while Sulla was fighting Mithridates in the east, Marius returned with his own army, recaptured Rome, and launched a bloody purge of Sulla's supporters. The city descended into a horrifying cycle of proscriptions and executions. When Sulla returned victorious from the east in 82 BCE, he marched on Rome a second time, crushing all opposition. He then established a brutal dictatorship, launching wide-ranging proscriptions that systematically eliminated his political opponents, seizing their property, and consolidating the power of the Senate. Sulla voluntarily retired from power in 79 BCE, a remarkable act for a man who had held absolute authority. But he had opened Pandora's box. He had shown future ambitious generals, men like Pompey and Caesar, that legions loyal to their commander could be used not just to conquer foreign lands, but to seize power within Rome itself. The Republic, though nominally restored by Sulla, was now truly bleeding, caught in a death spiral of power struggles, professional armies, and a dangerous precedent of civil war. The stage was set for the entrance of the most famous Roman of all. The political landscape of Rome in the mid-1st century BCE was a volatile mix of personal ambition, shifting alliances, and the simmering resentment of a society deeply divided. The Republic, though still outwardly functional, was tearing itself apart from within. Into this chaotic scene stepped three men whose combined power briefly held the Republic together, only for their inevitable clash to shatter it forever. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, a brilliant general and conqueror of the East. Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's wealthiest man, whose ambitions rivaled his fortune. And Gaius Julius Caesar, a charismatic politician, indebted aristocrat, and military prodigy. In 60 BCE, these three powerful figures formed the First Triumvirate, a secret political alliance designed to circumvent the Senate and achieve their individual goals through mutual support. Pompey wanted land for his veterans and ratification of his eastern settlements. Crassus desired military glory and financial advantages. Caesar, ever the opportunist, needed a military command to build his own reputation, wealth, and a loyal army. What he got was Gaul. Caesar's command in Gaul, modern-day France and Belgium, was initially seen by his political rivals as a way to keep him away from Rome, in a region considered wild and underdeveloped. What they didn't anticipate was that Caesar would turn this relatively minor command into a forge for his legend. From 58 to 50 BCE, Caesar embarked on a series of breathtaking campaigns known as the Gallic Wars. These weren't mere skirmishes. They were a systematic conquest of an enormous, complex, and fiercely independent region, home to numerous Celtic tribes. Caesar's genius lay not just in battle, but in his ability to divide and conquer, to exploit tribal rivalries, and to conduct campaigns with astonishing speed and efficiency. He even launched daring, if temporary, invasions of Britain, crossing the English Channel in a feat that awed his contemporaries. One of the most epic and defining moments of the Gallic Wars was the Siege of Alesia in 52 BCE. This was the culmination of the Gallic resistance, led by the formidable chieftain Vercingetorix, who had managed to unite most of the Gallic tribes against Rome. Vercingetorix retreated to the heavily fortified hilltop town of Alesia, believing its defenses impregnable and expecting a massive relief army to arrive. Caesar, facing a desperate situation, a strong enemy force inside a fortress and an even larger Gallic army converging from outside, responded with a feat of military engineering that remains unparalleled. He ordered the construction of two massive circumvallations, an inner wall, 11 miles long, to besiege Alesia itself, and an outer wall, 14 miles long, facing outwards to defend against the approaching relief force. These fortifications were bristling with watchtowers, ditches, traps, and palisades, creating a double ring of iron around Alesia. It was an audacious plan, effectively turning the besiegers into the besieged. When a massive Gallic relief army, estimated to be over 250,000 men, a vast exaggeration by Caesar, but still a huge force, arrived, they launched furious assaults on Caesar's outer defenses. At the same time, Vercingetorix launched desperate sallies from within Alesia. Caesar and his legions were caught in a brutal fight on two fronts, often outnumbered significantly. Yet, Roman discipline, engineering prowess, and Caesar's personal leadership carried the day. He rode tirelessly along the ramparts, rallying his men, personally leading counterattacks. The Gauls, despite their bravery in numbers, could not break the Roman lines. Eventually, both the relief army and Vercingetorix's forces within Alesia were starved and defeated. Vercingetorix famously surrendered by riding out of Alesia in full armor and casting his arms at Caesar's feet. This victory was a testament to Roman military might and Caesar's strategic brilliance, effectively ending Gallic independence and adding a vast, rich new territory to Rome's growing empire. While Caesar was conquering Gaul, the triumvirate began to unravel. Crassus, ever eager for military glory to rival Pompey and Caesar, led a massive Roman army east against the Parthian Empire, modern-day Iran. At the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE, Crassus's legions were annihilated by Parthian cataphracts, heavily armored cavalry, and horse archers. The Parthians used their superior mobility and archery to devastating effect, surrounding the slow-moving Roman infantry and peppering them with arrows until they broke. It was a catastrophic defeat for Rome, one of their worst since Cannæ, and Crassus himself was killed. His death removed the balancing force in the triumvirate, leaving only Pompey and Caesar, two ambitious giants, on a collision course. The Senate, increasingly fearful of Caesar's popularity and the immense wealth and loyal army he had amassed in Gaul, threw its support behind Pompey. They ordered Caesar to disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen, effectively stripping him of his power and leaving him vulnerable to prosecution by his enemies. Caesar faced a monumental choice: obey and lose everything, or defy the Senate and plunge Rome into civil war. In 49 BCE, with a single legion, he crossed the Rubicon River, the small stream that marked the boundary between his province and Italy, uttering the fateful words, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. This act was an irreversible declaration of war against the Republican Pompey. The ultimate civil war, the one that would determine the very fate of Rome, had begun. The crossing of the Rubicon was a point of no return, a theatrical gesture that irrevocably sealed the fate of the Roman Republic. Julius Caesar, with his loyal legions, had openly defied the Senate and his former ally, Pompey the Great. What followed was a civil war of unprecedented scale, pitting Roman against Roman, general against general, and ultimately deciding whether the Republic would endure or fall under the weight of one man's ambition. Pompey, though initially caught off guard by Caesar's swift invasion of Italy, commanded vast resources and the support of the Senate, most of the nobility in the eastern provinces. He was also a military genius in his own right. Pompey's strategy was to evacuate Rome and Italy, withdraw to Greece, and leverage his naval supremacy and the immense manpower of the East to build an overwhelming force. Caesar, ever bold and swift, pursued him across the Adriatic. The decisive confrontation of the civil war came at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE in Thessaly, Greece. Pompey commanded a significantly larger army, perhaps twice the size of Caesar's, and boasted a numerical superiority in cavalry, a crucial arm in ancient warfare. His plan was to use his superior numbers to pin Caesar's infantry, then unleash his cavalry to flank and envelop Caesar's legions. However, Caesar, whose legions were hardened veterans of the Gallic Wars, foresaw Pompey's maneuver. In a brilliant tactical stroke, Caesar hit a small, elite contingent of infantry behind his main line, instructing them to hold their pilum, javelins, like spears, and target the faces of Pompey's charging cavalry. This was highly unorthodox, as javelins were meant to be thrown. When Pompey's cavalry charged, expecting to sweep away Caesar's cavalry, they were met by this unexpected wall of spearmen. The sight of their comrades' faces being disfigured, combined with the sheer surprise of infantry fighting as anti-cavalry, caused Pompey's horsemen to break and flee. With Pompey's cavalry routed, Caesar's hidden infantry then wheeled around to attack the exposed flank of Pompey's main army. The result was a catastrophic rout. Pompey's army, despite its numerical advantage, collapsed. The battle was a testament to Caesar's tactical genius and the unwavering loyalty and discipline of his veterans. Pompey himself fled, seeking refuge in Egypt, hoping for support from the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. However, to curry favor with the victorious Caesar, Ptolemy's advisors tragically assassinated Pompey upon his arrival, presenting his head to Caesar. Caesar, upon seeing his rival's head, reportedly wept, not out of grief for a friend, but perhaps for the tragic end of a great Roman and for the final irrevocable step towards one-man rule. The death of Pompey effectively ended the main phase of the Civil War, but Caesar still had pockets of resistance to crush. Caesar spent the next few years consolidating his power and campaigning across the Roman world. In Egypt, he became embroiled in a dynastic struggle, famously siding with Cleopatra VII against her brother Ptolemy XIII, leading to the Battle of the Nile where Ptolemy's forces were defeated. He then marched to Asia Minor, where he swiftly crushed Pharnaces II of Pontus at the Battle of Zela, 47 BC, famously declaring, Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered, a phrase that perfectly encapsulates his lightning-fast campaigns. His most difficult remaining challenges were in Africa and Hispania, where remnants of the Optimate, anti-Caesar, faction, led by Pompey's sons and other Republican diehards, continued to resist. At the Battle of Thapsus in North Africa, 46 BC, Caesar decisively defeated the last major Republican army, which included Cato the Younger, who committed suicide rather than live under Caesar's rule. Finally, in 45 BCE, at the Battle of Munda in Hispania, Caesar faced a desperate struggle against Pompey's sons, Gnaeus and Sextus. This was perhaps Caesar's toughest battle, with his legions pushed to their limits. Only his personal intervention and the desperate fighting of his veterans secured a hard-won victory. With all his enemies defeated, Caesar returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the Roman world. He was appointed dictator for life, a title that openly flaunted the traditional Republican aversion to kingship. He embarked on ambitious reforms, public works, and initiated a new calendar, the Julian calendar, which we still largely follow today. However, his dictatorial powers and increasingly monarchical behavior alarmed many senators, who feared he would destroy the Republic completely and become king. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, a group of senators, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, assassinated him in the theater of Pompey. Caesar's death, far from restoring the Republic, plunged Rome into another, even bloodier series of civil wars. The men who killed him believed they were saving the Republic, but they had merely removed one strong man, opening the door for even more ruthless contenders. The Republic, after centuries of external triumph and internal strife, was finally on its deathbed. Its traditional structures, its core values, and its very foundation had been irrevocably shattered by the very legions it had created. The stage was now set for the final, bloody act that would determine Rome's new master. The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March, 44 BCE, was a desperate act by men who believed they were saving the Roman Republic from tyranny. Instead, it ignited a conflagration that consumed the last vestiges of the old Republic, leading to a new, even more brutal series of civil wars. The political vacuum left by Caesar's death sucked in a new generation of ambitious leaders, each vying for supremacy, backed by their own legions and political factions. The key players in this bloody aftermath were Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general and trusted confidant, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, another of Caesar's generals, and surprisingly, Gaius Octavius, Caesar's 19-year-old grandnephew, whom Caesar had posthumously adopted as his son and heir in his will. Octavius, initially dismissed as a mere boy, quickly displayed a shrewd political mind and an iron will, surprising both friends and enemies. Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian, as he was now known, initially found themselves at odds, but the common enemy, Caesar's assassins, led by Marcus Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, forced them into an uneasy alliance. In 43 BCE, they formally formed the Second Triumvirate, a legally sanctioned dictatorship that wielded absolute power. Unlike the First Triumvirate, this was not a secret pact, but an official body given authority by law. Their first act was a brutal purge, drawing up prescription lists of their political enemies, resulting in the murder of hundreds of senators and thousands of equestrians, including the renowned orator Cicero, who had dared to speak out against Antony. This wave of terror was designed to eliminate opposition and raise funds for the inevitable war against the assassins. Brutus and Cassius, meanwhile, had fled Rome, rallying support and armies in the eastern provinces, positioning themselves as the last defenders of Republican liberty. Their forces, though perhaps less experienced than the Triumvirate's veterans, were formidable and well-funded. The inevitable confrontation came in 42 BCE at the Battle of Philippi in Macedonia. This was not one, but two battles fought on the same field, a few weeks apart. In the first engagement, Octavian faced Brutus, while Antony confronted Cassius. Antony, a gifted military commander, swiftly crushed Cassius's wing, and Cassius, believing the entire battle lost, committed suicide. However, Brutus's forces simultaneously overran Octavian's camp, inflicting a defeat on the young Caesar. The outcome of the first day was mixed, but the death of Cassius was a severe blow to the Republican cause. 3 weeks later, the two remaining armies clashed again in the second battle of Philippi. This time, Antony's superior generalship and the relentless pressure of the Triumvirate's veteran legions proved decisive. Brutus's forces were utterly routed. Brutus himself, seeing no escape and refusing to be taken prisoner, also committed suicide. With the deaths of Brutus and Cassius, the last major champions of the old Roman Republic were gone. The spirit of the Republic, which had defined Rome for nearly 5 centuries, was finally extinguished on the plains of Philippi. With their common enemies eliminated, the victors divided the Roman world among themselves. Octavian, despite his youth, secured control of the crucial western provinces, including Italy and Gaul, which gave him access to vast manpower and resources. Antony, the seasoned general, took charge of the wealthier East, including Egypt, with its immense resources and the alluring presence of Queen Cleopatra VII. Lepidus, the less influential of the three, was marginalized, eventually stripped of his power and confined to a ceremonial role. This division, seemingly designed for peace, contained the seeds of the next and final civil war. Octavian, cold, calculating, and patient, began to consolidate his power in the West, building up his popularity through public works and veteran settlements. Antony, captivated by Cleopatra and the opulent lifestyle of the East, became increasingly estranged from Roman traditions and politics. He made political missteps, alienating influential figures in Rome, and his relationship with Cleopatra, culminating in the birth of their children and perceived Oriental influence, was skillfully exploited by Octavian's propaganda machine. Rome grew increasingly fearful that Antony intended to make Alexandria, not Rome, the capital of the empire, and that Cleopatra would wield undue influence over Roman affairs. The stage was being set for the ultimate showdown, a clash not just for control, but for the very soul of Rome. The former allies, Octavian and Antony, were now on an irreversible path to war, a conflict that would determine who would be the sole master of the Roman world. The simmering tension between Octavian and Mark Antony finally erupted into the ultimate civil war, a conflict that would not just decide who ruled Rome, but what form Rome itself would take. This wasn't a war for land or resources. It was a war for the very soul of the Roman world, a contest between Octavian's claim to be the legitimate heir and restorer of Roman values, and Antony's perceived abandonment of those values for the allure of the East and the enigmatic queen Cleopatra VII of Egypt. Antony, with Cleopatra's vast wealth and naval resources, commanded a formidable force, including a large fleet and numerous legions from the eastern provinces. Octavian, meanwhile, consolidated his power in the west, meticulously building a loyal army and navy and launching a masterful propaganda campaign against Antony, portraying him as a decadent eastern despot under the sway of a foreign queen. The Roman Senate, swayed by Octavian's influence and the growing fear of Cleopatra's power, formally declared war not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, off the coast of western Greece. This was primarily a naval battle, a clash of two massive fleets. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a fleet of large, heavily armed super galleys or octaremes, towering ships designed to ram and carry large numbers of marines. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant and loyal Admiral Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, consisted of smaller, faster, and more maneuverable ships. The battle itself was a tactical masterpiece by Agrippa. Antony's heavy ships, while formidable in direct confrontation, were slow and unwieldy. Agrippa's lighter vessels used their speed and agility to outmaneuver Antony's fleet, surrounding and attacking their ships from multiple angles. For hours, the two fleets grappled in a brutal struggle of ramming, boarding, and missile fire. Then, in a moment of either calculated maneuver or outright panic, Cleopatra's squadron, observing the deteriorating situation, broke through the lines and sailed away, heading for Egypt. Antony, seeing Cleopatra's retreat, abandoned his flagship and followed her. His departure demoralized his remaining forces, leading to a complete rout. The majority of his fleet was captured or destroyed, and his remaining legions on shore, disheartened by their general's flight, eventually surrendered to Octavian. The defeat at Actium was total and decisive. It effectively ended the civil war, leaving Octavian as the sole undisputed master of the Roman world. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, but their cause was lost. Octavian pursued them relentlessly. In 30 BCE, as Octavian's forces closed in on Alexandria, both Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide, Antony falling on his own sword, and Cleopatra famously allowing herself to be bitten by an ASP, choosing death over being paraded as a captive in a Roman triumph. With their deaths, Egypt, the last great Hellenistic kingdom, became a Roman province, bringing its immense wealth directly into Roman hands. Octavian, now the undisputed power in Rome, faced a momentous challenge: how to transform the shattered republic into a stable, lasting system without appearing to be a king or dictator, which Romans still deeply resented. He understood the lessons of Caesar's assassination. Over the next few years, through a series of subtle political maneuvers and careful propaganda, he gradually accumulated immense power while meticulously maintaining the facade of the Republic. He relinquished his emergency powers, took on the title of Princeps, first citizen, and in 27 BCE, the Senate bestowed upon him the revered title of Augustus, the Revered One. This moment, 27 BCE, is often considered the symbolic end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire, though Augustus himself always claimed to have restored the Republic. He ruled for over 40 years, bringing an unprecedented era of peace and stability known as the Pax Romana, Roman peace. He reorganized the army, established a professional civil service, initiated vast building projects, and secured the empire's borders. The civil wars were over. Rome had moved from a warring republic to a consolidated empire, led by an emperor who commanded ultimate authority through his control of the legions. The focus of Roman military power now shifted from internal conquest to the defense and expansion of its vast imperial frontiers, laying the groundwork for centuries of stability and growth. With the dawn of the Roman Empire under Augustus, the nature of Roman warfare shifted dramatically. The age of grand internal civil wars and sweeping conquests of vast, wealthy empires gave way to an era primarily focused on consolidating, defending, and administering a vast imperial frontier. The legions, once instruments of expansion, now became guardians of the Pax Romana, protecting the empire from external threats, primarily the barbarian tribes along its extensive borders. Yet, even the mighty Roman Empire, at its zenith, would face brutal defeats that foreshadowed its eventual decline. One of the most infamous disasters in Roman military history occurred in 9 CE, during the reign of Augustus, in the dense, dark forests of Germania. 3 Roman legions, the 17, 18, and 19, along with their auxiliaries, commanded by the experienced General Publius Quinctilius Varus, were ambushed and annihilated at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. This was a betrayal on a scale that profoundly shocked Rome. The mastermind was Arminius, a chieftain of the Germanic Cherusei tribe, who had served in the Roman army, gained Roman citizenship, and understood Roman tactics intimately. He feigned loyalty, lured Varus's army deep into the treacherous terrain, then sprang a meticulously planned trap. For 3 days, the Romans, strung out in a long marching column through the marshy, wooded terrain, were relentlessly attacked by the concealed Germanic warriors. The tightly disciplined Roman legions, so effective on open battlefields, were utterly helpless in the confined forest, unable to form their proper lines or maneuver. Their javelins were ineffective in the close quarters, and their heavy armor became a liability. Thousands were slaughtered, Varus committed suicide, and the imperial eagles, the sacred standards of the legions, were captured, a supreme humiliation. This defeat was so devastating that Augustus reportedly cried out in despair. Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions. Teutoburg Forest marked a critical turning point. Rome largely abandoned its ambition to conquer Germania east of the Rhine River, solidifying that river as a permanent imperial frontier and acknowledging the limits of its expansion. Despite this setback, the empire continued to thrive and even expand under later emperors. Trajan, for instance, in the early 2nd century CE, famously led 2 major campaigns known as the Dacian Wars, 101 to 102 CE and 105 to 106 CE. Dacia, a rich kingdom located north of the Danube River, modern-day Romania, was a persistent threat with its fierce warriors and valuable gold mines. Trajan, a superb general, led his legions across the Danube, using immense engineering feats, including the construction of a massive bridge. The Dacian king, Decebalus, was a formidable opponent, but he was ultimately outmaneuvered and defeated. The Dacian capital, Sarmizegetusa Regia, was captured, and Dacia became a Roman province. This was Rome's last major territorial conquest, bringing the empire to its greatest geographical extent. Trajan's Column in Rome, a stunning relief sculpture, immortalizes these campaigns, depicting the relentless efficiency and brutal effectiveness of the Roman army. Following Trajan, Emperor Hadrian, 117 to 138 CE, recognized that the empire had reached its natural limits. He shifted strategy from expansion to consolidation and defense. His most famous legacy is Hadrian's Wall, a massive defensive fortification stretching 73 miles across northern Britain, built to protect Roman Britannia from the Picts and other tribes to the north. This monumental structure, along with the Limes Germanicus and other frontier fortifications across the empire, symbolized a new reality. Rome was no longer just conquering, it was defending. The vast legions were now spread thin along thousands of miles of border, constantly vigilant against raids, incursions, and the ever-growing pressure of barbarian movements. As centuries passed, the pressures on the empire intensified. Internal political instability, economic crises, and the constant strain of defending such vast borders against increasingly sophisticated and numerous barbarian groups began to take their toll. The army, once an elite force of Roman citizens, became increasingly composed of barbarian mercenaries, whose loyalty was often fleeting. The tactical flexibility and discipline that had defined the legions slowly eroded. The ultimate catastrophic defeat that signaled the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire came at the Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE. Emperor Valens led a large Roman army against a massive Gothic confederation, who, pushed by the Huns, were seeking refuge within Roman territory, but were now rebelling due to Roman mistreatment. Valens, eager for glory, attacked the Goths without waiting for reinforcements from the Western Emperor-Gratian. The Goths, particularly their formidable cavalry, outmaneuvered and utterly destroyed the Roman army. Emperor Valens himself was killed in battle, a rare and terrifying occurrence for a Roman emperor. Adrianople was not just a defeat, it was a massacre. 2/3 of the Eastern Roman field army was annihilated, and it revealed that the Roman infantry, once supreme, could no longer stand against barbarian cavalry in open battle. It shattered the myth of Roman invincibility and forced the empire to radically rethink its military strategy, often relying on negotiated settlements and alliances with the very barbarians they once dominated. From this point, the Western Roman Empire entered a long, slow decline. While the Eastern Roman, Byzantine, Empire would continue for another 1,000 years, the West was increasingly overrun by successive waves of barbarian invasions. Goths, Vandals, Huns, Franks, and others. The city of Rome itself was sacked multiple times. The legions, once the engine of an unstoppable empire, could no longer defend it. Finally, in 476 CE, the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, a largely symbolic act that marked the traditional fall of the Western Roman Empire. The story of Rome, from its humble beginnings on 7 hills to its vast empire and eventual decline, is a testament to military innovation, unwavering discipline, and an unparalleled will to endure. Its battles, from the gritty skirmishes of the early republic to the grand, empire-shaping conflicts of its zenith and the desperate struggles of its twilight, forged not just a dominion, but a legacy that shaped Western civilization. The legions may have fallen, but the echoes of their triumphs and their struggles resonate to this day. We have journeyed through centuries of dust, blood, and triumph, tracing the path of Rome from a small republic on 7 hills to the master of a vast empire. We have witnessed the relentless discipline of its legions, the strategic genius of its commanders, and the sheer, unyielding will of a people who reshaped the ancient world. From the desperate struggles against the Samnites, forging the flexible Manipular legion, to the existential threat of Hannibal, testing Rome's very soul at Cannae, to the ultimate civil wars that birthed an empire from the ashes of a republic. Each battle tells a story not just of military tactics, but of human ambition, resilience, and transformation. The story of Rome's battles is not merely a chronicle of violence. It is a profound lesson in adaptation. The Romans were masters of learning from their enemies, whether it was adopting the Carthaginian ship design to build a navy, or evolving their phalanx into the versatile legion after facing the Samnites in the mountains. Their engineering prowess, their logistical brilliance, and their capacity for relentless innovation were as crucial as any individual general's genius. And their unwavering discipline, even in the face of annihilation, became legendary. These were the pillars upon which an empire was built. Yet, as we saw in the civil wars and at battles like Teutoburg Forest and Adrianople, even the mightiest empire can be undone by internal divisions, hubris, and the relentless pressure of external forces. The very strengths that built Rome, the ambition of its generals, the loyalty of legions to their commanders, the insatiable drive for expansion, eventually became its fatal flaws. The Republic, designed for a city-state, strained and then broke under the weight of an empire, giving way to an autocratic system that, while bringing stability for centuries, also contained the seeds of its own decline. The lessons are clear. Unchecked power can corrupt. Internal discord weakens even the strongest foundations, and overextension can strain resources to the breaking point. As we reflect on these grand narratives, it's impossible not to draw parallels with our own modern world. The struggle for resources, the clash of ideologies, the rise and fall of great powers. These are not new themes. The importance of strong leadership, but also the dangers of unchecked ambition, resonate as much today as they did in ancient Rome. We too face challenges that require adaptation, innovation, and unity. The quiet hum of history reminds us that no civilization, no matter how powerful, is immune to the forces of change, internal strife, or external pressures. The resilience of the human spirit, however, remains a constant. The Roman Empire, for all its might and its flaws, stood for over 1,000 years in some form, shaping laws, languages, and cultures that still influence us today. Its battles were not just fights for territory. They were moments that forged identities, tested limits, and fundamentally altered the course of Western civilization. From the clash of gladii to the thundering charge of cavalry, from the ingenuity of sieges to the quiet determination of the Roman centurion, the echoes of their struggles can still be heard if we listen closely. And with that, our journey through the great battles of ancient Rome comes to a gentle close. We've covered a vast sweep of history, from the Republic's earliest struggles to the Empire's final twilight. And we hope these quiet histories have offered not just knowledge, but a sense of peace and wonder. Thank you for spending this time with us, for listening, and for joining us on this historical adventure. We genuinely hope that by now, you've drifted off into a peaceful, restorative sleep, perhaps with dreams of legions marching under distant stars. If not, may your mind be calm and your body relaxed, ready to embrace the tranquility of the night. Good night.